Hello everybody, how are you? Chris from Wicked Repairs here. Today we have a Slingshot. This is a 2015 Polaris Slingshot, and we are replacing the right angle drive input shaft seal. It is leaking, which a lot of these things do. It's a pretty common occurrence, and I've done many of them. So I'm going to show you a video on how to replace that seal to the right angle drive. So I've already drained the right angle drive. You can see it dripping ever so slightly there, and I already started taking apart the prop shaft where the U joints are. You can see the socket in there and the Allen head. So there's those two little U bolts, pinch brackets there, and there's 4 5mm Allen head bolts. They are Loctited in there. Sometimes you need to add a little heat to the end of the yoke right here, where the bolt goes in, and they usually come right out. This one, all 4 of them came out pretty good without any heat, so it's no problem. And you can see all this debris over here and stuff. This is all from oil coming out of the seal on the right angle drive. And after we get those off, right up top here, and there's a series of 6 8mm head Allen bolts there, and they also have little brackets on them. It's always a good thing, and I always do this before I take them off, I mark them, because the drive shaft or prop shaft is balanced, according to that pattern and everything. So it's important. I usually take a paint pen and I'll do like 1 line here on the bracket and like 2 lines there on the bracket till it comes down to the point that I know I'm going to be able to match it up when I put it back on. So it's important to put that back on in the same orientation, or you could get a vibration that wasn't there before or something. So I'm going to continue to remove this last bolt there, and then I'm going to take those 6 bolts out, 8mm Allen heads over there. They're actually 6mm. I'm sorry, they're not 8mm Allen bolts. They're 6mm. So I'm going to take all 6 of those 6mm Allen head bolts out, and finish taking this one out, and then pop the prop shaft off from the rear end forward and pull it out. And then we're going to need a puller to get this yoke off, and there's a big I believe it's a 29mm nut that holds on the yoke. So we'll take off the nut and then get the puller, and we'll pull that yoke right out. Just before I start taking this apart, I just want to show you, I just made like a little paint mark here, one down here where the couplers actually meet, and then a couple up there where that bracket is, just so everything goes back in the same orientation. We don't have any vibration issues. Now of course you're going to have to elevate the machine, whether it's on a lift or on jacks like I have here, because it's so low to the ground. But regardless, you're going to need the wheel off the ground, and you're going to have to put the parking brake on to break these bolts loose out of here and out of the front of the prop shaft as well, because it's just going to spin, of course, if you try to break the bolts loose without having the parking brake on. So you're going to want the wheel elevated, parking brake on, get the bolts that you can on the bottom side, shut the parking brake off, rotate the prop shaft, put the parking brake on, get the rest of the bolts off. I have all of those loose now, and so we have the parking brake on still, but these are all loose. We should be able to just pull these all out. And there is Loctite on these as well. And they actually lay the Loctite on there real thick in one portion of the threads, so that if they happen to get loose, they don't rattle and pop off. You can see that portion there where it's really thick. Those threads don't actually thread into anything. They just glob on a bunch of Loctite there, green Loctite, like bearing retainer Loctite, just to hold it in place, just in case something happens. Well, those ones are on there pretty good. So what we're going to want to do now is pop off this prop shaft. Sometimes they pop right out, sometimes they don't. This one doesn't seem to want to. Trying to reach for pry bar, so I got my pry bar here, and just gonna pry a little bit just to get the U-joint off of there. And be careful, these caps don't fall off, and then you have your bearings, the little pins flying everywhere. So, alright, I'm gonna pop the rest of this off. I'm gonna need two hands here instead of holding the camera. And basically, when you pop it off, you just slide it off out this upper portion of the frame, out the side of the right angle drive, and just slide it right out. Alright, so we have the prop shaft off. Now we need to remove this nut. You need a long impact 30mm socket. Okay, so you need, it's upside down, but it's a 30mm socket. And hit that with the impact gun, take it off, and then we're going to put a puller on the yoke and pull the yoke. When you put this nut back on, you are supposed to grease the face of the nut and put it in. We're going to replace the seal, of course, the O-ring and the crush sleeve that's inside of here. And when you put this nut on, you do not impact that back on. It needs to be torqued properly, and there is no specific actual torque spec, but put it on by hand and put it tight until there's no more play in the yoke. And then you have to back it up and then drive it in again and do the same thing. Make sure there's no play in the yoke and just tighten it up basically as snug as you can, you know, without over torquing it. That's why they don't want you to use a gun, an impact gun or anything, because you don't want it to pull on this bevel gear inside of here and change the pitch of your gears inside the transaxle unit, the right angle drive. So we're going to take off that nut with a 30mm socket and then get the puller on. So this is the nut, 30mm nut for the yoke. That should come right off, no problem. This is the master bolt grip set that I'm using for the puller, so we're going to need this. Going to need that. We need that, and we have these bolts with these big washers that are actually snowmobile backers that I use for washers because they work fantastic. And I'm going to get that puller on and remove the yoke. Okay, once you get the puller on there, that's basically what it should look like. That center part of the puller should be in the center of the shaft there. All the 10mm bolts that I have in here, they're all evenly snugged, identical, actually the same, all the way around. And we're going to do 19mm. This is a 19mm for my tool here, and I'm going to drive that in until the yoke pops off. And we'll be able to remove the seal and everything else and replace it. And there's the yoke. It didn't take too much, just a little bit, popped right off. So then we're going to remove the puller here. I'm going to take the seal out, get the O-ring out, because there's an O-ring on the shaft that seals where the shaft meets the inner part of the yoke here. And then the oil seal on the outside, of course, seals the outside. It's always good to inspect this, make sure there's no burrs or anything like that. You will see some wear, of course, I mean, the thing had a couple 100,000 miles on it. I'd say, you know, probably better off replacing the yoke as well, case that thing gets really worn over time from dust and dirt and debris getting inside in between the seal and that outer portion of the yoke. But this is definitely fine. And I always want everything to go back together clean, of course, so I always take a little extra time to make sure that I clean stuff like this portion of the yoke here. You can see it's kind of rusty from time, so I clean all that stuff up with a little Scotch-Brite pad, just so when it goes back together it doesn't have those scratches and debris inside of here, and everything will hopefully seat and fit a little better. As far as removing the seal, I have a seal puller. I've actually ground it down and modified it a little bit because I've done so many of these. There it is. Pop off the old seal. I'm going to get a pick, get in the inside of there. We have to pull that collar off, and then I'll take a little pick to get the O-ring off. And that's actually where it seals, is where that collar and O-ring is. So see, it's pretty dirty and nasty in there. So I'm going to pull this little collar out. I'm going to get the O-ring out and the crush sleeve and replace all that. And if you'd like to see the parts, this is the oil seal or yoke seal. This is the O-ring that I speak of, and this is what the crush sleeve is. Okay, so this will literally crush and tighten down, you know, at proper torque, and it will keep you from over torquing and pulling on, putting pressure on that gear in there when you tighten down the yoke. So I'm going to replace the crush sleeve, replace the O-ring, replace the oil seal. So this is the O-ring, and it does seal inside here. This is basically the collar on your yoke that seals over that O-ring. I don't know why I said a separate collar inside. The other part that's inside needs to come out that you have to take out is the bearing, and it comes out pretty easily, but that's there, and then their crush sleeve is inside there behind that, right underneath it basically. So yeah, this O-ring goes on the shaft and seals this part of the yoke when you put it on. So I always, on the new one, I always apply a little bit of grease to this, of course, so that when you put the yoke on, it doesn't fold it or anything, and it slides on it good and properly. So that's what we're gonna do. Start putting it back together. All right, so we got the new seal on. We got all the crush sleeve, new crush sleeve in there, new O-ring, and you can see there's some grease there, and there's quite a bit of gap there as well. So when you slide the yoke back on, slide it on, I give it a little wiggle, and I usually give it a little palm shot on the end to just get enough threads in there so that I can get the nut on. So then I'll get the nut on, and I tighten it on by hand as much as I can. And now I'm going to go with a ratchet and the 30mm socket, and I'm going to tighten that by hand until this shaft has, this yoke has no play in it. Okay, right now it's got quite a bit of play. I'm going to do that until there's no play in there. I've already greased the lip of the nut, and once that seats, we're going to take the nut back off and reseat it again the same exact way. So I'm going to do that, and then this whole portion will be all set. We'll just have to put the prop shaft back on and put oil inside the right angle drive. Okay, so that's about what you should see. Tighten up the nut. There's no more play in this yoke. It's nice and tight. So you should see about that much of a gap, give or take, you know, a millimeter or two, maybe tops, but right about there. I've already removed the nut back off of the shaft, and I'm going to reseat it again, and I'm going to put just a little drop of blue Loctite on the nut just for safety's sake. And once again, I'm going to tighten that down just by hand. It basically, when you tighten it down to where it's supposed to be, you tighten it down by hand, and it's like you can't even turn it anymore if you tried. So just get it on there nice and snug, and then we'll put the prop shaft back on. Alright, so we got the prop shaft up. It's on there. You can see like the little tabs on the bottom of the cross joint here. That's all that's holding it in place right now. Basically that, and the fact that this side's pushed forward, so you know where that other little lip is there. So right now I have no hardware holding it up. It should just stay like that, no problem, while you get your hardware or whatever. I just want to remind you that these bolts in the rear, as well as these bolts in the front, do have Loctite on them, so please apply Loctite to the bolts again. Clean the old stuff off, put Loctite on, put it on, and you know, tighten all that stuff down, and get your prop shaft on there, and you should be golden. You're good to go. We're going to tighten all that stuff, get the new hardware on there with fresh Loctite, and then we're going to fill the right angle drive with oil and be on our way.